Incidents for risk management can take lots of different forms, and some of these are very public and large exposure type of incidents, and some of them are very quiet behind the scenes and don't really come out and make publicity, but have material impact to an organization. Some of these incidents could impact things like financial performance for an organization. We could have the ineffectiveness of an IT project being rolled out, where if we don't actually have a good risk management program, we might actually be trying to deploy a technology inside of a company where the product isn't actually solving exactly the problem that the business end needs, and because the way we roll it out, it may not actually be effective when it gets actually deployed. From a recent example in terms of how bad could a problem be, it could be something simple as an organization failing, say, their PCI audit around credit card security, or from a very large-scale incident. Take a look at what's happened very recently with the NSA and Edward Snowden, where some bad practices put in place, all the way from human resources and the procurement of personnel to the ability to kind of monitor and manage projects, that is, all the way down to the security of particular pieces of data, has led to a disclosure of extremely sensitive information and turned into an international political event. Sure, absolutely. So organizations can reduce risk through information risk management really by first eliminating any kind of conflicts and getting kind of discovery of information that's available out there. By trying to drive for transparency, organizations can actually go through and discover what information is available, what policies are available, what controls are out there, but really determining what gaps are out there in terms of what does the business need, what are they putting in place, and really what is available through their IT organizations. And by discovering what the needs are based on business drivers and really what's being provided through the organization, can determine where opportunities to win are and really what things are being missed, or where the kind of first strikes are, or the opportunity for really good ROI, really the best investment to start with and get the greatest return for the initial project. Automation is key in risk management. Risk management is a very complex discipline, a lot of data drivers, a lot of input in there, and automation provides a couple of key benefits. First and foremost, it actually takes the human element out of the equation, and the human element's important for providing input, but the human participation is actually not very good in terms of getting an efficient, repeatable process. And so automation is key to getting good ROI back, because we want to be able to do things very rapidly, but we want to make sure that we do it consistently and we do it over and over again. And that's the difference between having, say, a human working through with, say, a ledger and an Excel spreadsheet, as opposed to having a large-scale system that can tally things, process things very quickly, and double-check things in a much faster standpoint. As organizations move from very small, centric organizations in their town to, say, a large organization that's across, say, Malaysia, now into international, global businesses that span time zones, it's really not practical to have it driven from a manual standpoint. And technology has to become involved, especially as we've moved more and more to business processes that are really functions of machine-to-machine interactions. People kind of become a hindrance a little bit in there, and so the people certainly drive the need and the input in there, but it's the automation that's going to make things smoother and more efficient. Sure, the very first thing is I would recommend having a central repository, a risk repository, as it were, a central place that we can actually lay out risks for the organization, have not only the risks available, but in terms of ownership. We want to have that in ownership, actions, dates. We really want to have basically this repository that says, from an organizational standpoint, we have transparency and visibility across business units, across technology groups and services, so that we can work off of the single source of truth, that we don't have kind of IT running off of one set of priorities and maybe finance running off a different set of priorities. We want to lay this out for the enterprise and be able to kind of stack rank them and then say, you know what, as we look at these things as a whole, we can find, say, commonalities, and I can find certain projects that I might be able to have implemented that would have one or more beneficiaries come from that. So that single repository would really be probably one of the first things you could do in terms of getting transparency out there. That repository will be key for any kind of management system that gets deployed on top of that, and will be one of the key drivers for implementing any type of technology for automation. They don't yet. They really don't. Risk management isn't necessarily a new practice, but it is getting very mature. So some organizations don't realize that there are a lot of good resources available out there in terms of things like the Unified Compliance Framework, for example, which takes industry best practices across nationalities, across verticals, and across different regulatory concerns and maps them in a matrix across each other so that you can take a look at a specific risk and see that this risk might apply from a financial sector. It also may apply to a local nationality or a local state for banking concerns. And then being able to see that in a single place becomes very helpful. There are resources like that, as well as input from well-known analyst firms like Gartner or IDC that would make it very available that people can take this guidance and these resources into their organization. But for the most part, the standardized frameworks like, say, ISO, for example, are very well known. Other than that, I would say most organizations don't have that much of awareness of what's out there. They're certainly at risk, maybe not from an information standpoint, though that's certainly the ultimate outcome. Certainly from the business standpoint, they will be at risk right off the bat. And a manual standpoint will cause them to eventually lose track of something. In the environment we work in today, we are generating amazing amounts of data, both internally in terms of our organizations, our IT systems, our financial systems. These production systems generate tons and tons of data. When we take that in consideration of the data in the world around us, so from, say, social media, for example, as well as all the different places input can come from. It's not only from our workstations in the office, but our mobile devices, where our employees might be working remotely and traveling around the world. If we do this manually, it's really impossible to keep up with the data there. So I think the first thing business will suffer from is really they'll miss something. Something will slip through the cracks. That's where IT really becomes the solution for organizations, because by putting in technology to help address risk management really starts to give them the ability to look at larger data sets, to mine that data, to look for trends, to look for specific areas of risk that the business is not aware about. It's just really a challenge to do that statistical analysis manually in large data sets that are relevant to a company today. Absolutely. I mean, not only is the technology changing, we change from the platforms we use for massive changes from desktop computing to laptops, now to tablets, to our handhelds. Everything moves at such a breakneck pace. We have a hard time keeping source of where the data is coming from and where is it being consumed at. But not only do we have to keep up with the change of platforms, it's really the change of pace in business. Today's business is built on mergers and acquisitions, large-scale businesses sweeping up all kinds of small businesses to consolidate industries. The change pace that's out there, the pace of change really is hard for organizations to say, well, we knew what lines of business we were in, we knew what states we were in, what countries we did business in, and those are very dynamic now. Take that and start expanding that out of our data centers and moving into, say, cloud technology, where my data lives in kind of the ether here, where it's very transient, and I have concerns about where my data is at. Is it in an appropriate place? And if I do business in certain regions of the world, the EU, for example, I have extremely stringent laws about can I even move data in there or out of there. So I might get data into a data center, say perhaps in France, and may not be able to get it back out strictly because, say, privacy laws.
What sort of softwares are in place in helping organizations to mitigate their IT risk?
Sure, there's lots of good solutions out there, and most of these will take an approach of standardizing, automating at the beginning, just processes. So simple things like, say, configuration management and assessment, being able to gather large pieces of data across an organization in a standardized format. Those start rolling up into, from, say, configuration management into maybe a vulnerability management type system that looks for specific exposures in IT systems. But those really, in the end, roll up to larger, what we call kind of GRC frameworks, those governance, risk, and compliance solutions that will have industry best practices for specific topics like healthcare privacy or credit card security. And they take those and combine those with the business functions. So from sales, marketing, manufacturing, human resources, those management systems are designed to actually really kind of embody that repository that I was talking about. And so creating a single place for the data where we can overlay the policies as well as the business concerns on top of that. And then I'm able to map those out, and I can kind of automate those not only in workflows and signatory processes, but I can use those also to surface up data for reporting and dashboarding purposes.
Do companies sort of need to be more vigilant in selecting the right software? I think you just earlier you mentioned it's easy for a company to put data in, but to take it out is going to be a problem. It might be a problem.
Absolutely. I mean, now more than ever, I think it's critical for companies to be paying attention where they're investing in not only software but technology in general. So the vendors that you choose, we have to be careful not to get locked into those. As we move into fancier solutions, faster-paced solutions, we have to have the ability to be able to integrate with different types of technologies. We have to have the ability to modify the solutions. They can't be very structured and static where they're stuck in kind of a box. We need to be able to have a box that we can kind of fold in different shapes and sizes to fit the data that we need today and the data we're going to be using tomorrow. And it just gets worse as we move parts of our organization. So as we take our first steps from a traditional data center into the cloud, say we start moving, say, human resources to a hosted system in Salesforce. Now I take my data a little bit out of my control and offer it up to another organization. Being able to get it back is a very good concern out of there. Picking the wrong strategy in terms of pushing in the wrong direction may actually lock me into a decision that's not easy to reverse engineer. And so, for example, a large organization may be investing a lot in reorganizing the entire company from a system structure all the way out. They're kind of reinventing themselves. If they don't have the right information up front, not only from the business end of things but the technology end of things, they can start marching down a path, spending millions and millions of dollars, aiming at a destination that turns out they were looking in the wrong place. And 5 years, 10 years down the road, they may be too far down a path that they can't get back. And so instead of having enough information up front to pick the right target, they may have moved either with the wrong vendor, the wrong software, or not have had, say, the flexibility to change off that path, and they'll find themselves in a bad predicament where they've actually had some major expenditures and made no material impact for the organization. Absolutely. So a lot of organizations will pick, for example, a database vendor that they've built applications on top of, and they've coded specifically to kind of proprietary functions that are just part of that vendor's technology. Instead of designing with open systems in mind, with flexibility, with the concerns of migration and upgradability in the future, they're much more focused on tactical decisions. So they have guys in shop with certain skill sets. They build to that code, and then that's exactly what happens. They get locked in, and then they decide that, Microsoft SQL is no longer the platform that takes care of us. I need to get to Oracle. And they find out that they've coded themselves to specific functions that don't translate somewhere else. And so they don't have the ability to kind of forklift that app off onto another piece of technology. That's painful and expensive in a traditional IT environment. As we get to more modern environments and we want to rely on cloud computing, the promise of cloud computing is for our computing environment to kind of be this dynamic workload that I can actually scale as needed and move among platform providers without having to necessarily recode the structure. And that has happened more and more. And it could actually be in even a worse situation. That's a very operational kind of example in terms of I made a bad choice and I have to pay for it. But if you, for example, put all your eggs in one basket and we go to a particular vendor and that vendor goes away, what's the question, how do I start getting this back? How do I question, so where's my data? How do I get back to my data? So, for example, if we use a corporate email vendor and we pour all our email resources into that, and over the weekend, they go bankrupt. Monday morning, I have no email. Nobody's answering the phones. If you go to their office, you could rattle the door and it's chained shut. The questions come up in terms of where's my data? And who do I call? And how do I get my data back? And those are challenges you have to worry about. And risk management, especially in a procurement standpoint, comes into play because we are going to have to consider that in terms of what's in our service level agreements, how we negotiated contracts. Do we have things like code escrow available? Because if we make a decision like that and we hand over too much control, yeah, we could get locked in and either have no access to a system, or we could have proprietary data that may not be retrievable.